Hey guys, we are in our second week of Second Peter this week, and we're going to be covering chapter 1, verses 5 through 15. Peter, in the first week, last week we saw he kind of urged us to live lives of godliness, and he tells us we have everything that we need, or God has given us everything we need in order to do that. And then this week he starts in verse 5 through 7 with a list of qualities and characteristics that we should, he says, make every effort and be diligent to add them to our lives. And then he goes on to give some pretty weighty promises if we do that. He says, if you have these qualities and they're increasing in your life, you can be sure that you are a Christian. You can be sure that you will persevere in the faith. You can be sure that the gates of heaven will be open to you. You can be sure that your faith will be fruitful and effective. And so we're going to unpack all of that together, and we're going to take a look at this list of 8 qualities and virtues that Peter lists for us in verses 5 through 7. And specifically, we're going to do a quick little exercise together in the main lesson to try to see if there's a pattern or anything kind of deeper that Peter's trying to communicate with the list of these specific 8 qualities. And the conclusion we'll come to is there's not necessarily a pattern throughout the list, but it seems intentional that Peter starts the list with faith and he ends the list with love. And what we think that Peter's trying to communicate there is that faith is the foundation and the grounds and the motivation for all acts of Christian virtue and all Christian character. Faith is the foundation and love is the end goal. And so that's why Peter starts with faith and ends with love. Faith is the foundation of our Christian character and love is the goal. So I'm going to unpack that, and then I'm going to try to make that more concrete by taking one of the other characteristics in that list and seeing how that applies. So I'm going to look at self-control, which is one of the 8 that Peter lists in our large group time. And I'm going to ask, how is faith the foundation and the grounds and the motivation for self-control? And how is love the ultimate goal of self-control? And I'll unpack that. Faith is the foundation for self-control because we exercise Christian self-control even when we are certain that we could get away with things and we're certain that it would be beneficial to us from an earthly perspective, and yet we still exercise self-control because we believe in a God who sees everything and who is righteous and who will bring things into judgment. And so that gives us a ground and a motivation to exercise self-control. And then love is the goal of self-control. We're not exercising self-control as Christians so that we can be self-righteous and we can be morally superior to others. We're not doing it so that God will save us because of our acts of obedience. We exercise self-control as a means to loving the Lord and loving our neighbor better. And so I'll unpack all of that, and then I'm going to be nodding throughout that to, in discussion groups, you guys are going to have an opportunity to take these other characteristics and do that same thing. How is faith the foundation for this characteristic, and how is love the end goal of this characteristic? So after you do comments and questions and clarifications, that's where you can start. I think that's where I'm going to start with the high schoolers, and I'm going to have them split into groups and give each of them one of these characteristics. So there's 5 left: goodness, knowledge, steadfastness, godliness, and brotherly affection. And I'll give each of those groups one of those qualities and tell them, take 3 minutes or so and ask yourselves, try to figure out in your group, how is faith the ground and the motivation for this characteristic, and how is love the end goal of this characteristic? You guys can choose to do that in your groups how you wish. For the middle school guys, I think I would suggest, if you are going to do this activity, if you think they can't even, that this is too difficult, you have my permission to skip questions. But I think regardless, I would probably try to do this together rather than splitting that group up. So try to do it as a group, and maybe just pick the 2 or 3 that you think are the most clear, that you can answer the most clearly and help guide them along that path. Middle school girls, I'm less familiar with your group, so do this as you see fit and how you think would work best with them. Again, if you think this is not going to work at all, you can skip it and go to other questions. But if you are going to do it, give time yourself to think through each of these 5 characteristics and see if you can come up with solid answers yourself so that you can be confident heading into it and help students arrive at the right conclusions. So again, the questions you're asking is, how is faith the root and the foundation of knowledge and steadfastness and brotherly affection and godliness? And how is love the end goal? Last thing here, left a little definition for just goodness and for godliness to try to differentiate the two, because I think there's a lot of overlap between them, especially in the way that we use them. And so if you split students into groups, make sure you give them that specific definition, that godliness is a reverence or devotion to the Lord, and goodness is kind of this general moral excellence. So take what you will from that, whether you decide to do that or not. And press on to the next question, and that is diving into verses 12 through 15. I'm not going to have time to cover those in the main lesson. They're really simple. It's just Peter talks about reminding his readers. He says, I know that you know these things, but I see it necessary to remind you. I know I'm going to be killed soon, and so I think it's all the more necessary that I remind you so that you remember these things after I'm gone. So just have them read that. You can either read it as a group or read it individually, and then see if they can just point out what's the main idea and the point from those verses, and how does that kind of add to, contribute to the lesson that we went through today, which is the main lesson, the main point. So that can be a semi-quick activity, and those verses are not too complicated to break down, but read them ahead of time yourselves. Next question is, how can we be sure that we don't become legalists when we make every effort and diligently pursue adding these qualities to our lives? So how do we pursue these things without becoming legalistic Christians that are pursuing self-righteousness or pursuing works-based salvation? And I've got some answers for you there that are fairly simple. Yourself and students, I'm sure, can come up with some other things that are helpful to add there as well. And then the last question is, I'm going to ask this question in our large group time. How can I be sure that I'm saved? How can I be sure that I'm a Christian? And this last question is just, how often should we ask ourselves that? As a Christian, or someone who believes I'm a Christian, how often should I be asking myself, am I sure that I'm a Christian? Am I sure that I'm saved? I left my opinion down here that I think people should probably ask this question more often than they do. Oftentimes in a healthy Christian, you'll ask it and immediately point to things that are signs and fruit that you are saved, and you don't have to spend a lot of time on it. But there's also a lot of people who think that they're Christians that should be concerned with the way that they're leading their lives and may not actually be Christians. And I think we get into real trouble when we just never ask this question of ourselves. We just assume and presume upon God that He has saved us, regardless of how we're living our lives. And I think that's problematic. We should be concerned and attentive to the spiritual pulse in our life, which means we should probably be asking questions like this, or something similar, like, am I growing? How have I grown recently? We should ask that more often probably than most of our students certainly do. So those are the questions. There's a lot here. You're not going to get to all of this, so feel free for your specific groups, pick and choose what you think is going to be most effective and roll with that, and I trust you to do that. Don't try to get through all of those questions. You're not going to make it. So I'll see you guys on Sunday. Thanks for what you do.